North Korea's tested a nuclear bomb believed to be 10 times more destructive than Hiroshima.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission.
Kim Jong-un versus Donald Trump is the most dangerous standoff in decades.
We will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
So how did North Korea achieve its nuclear ambitions? We show how their spies have been trying to steal blueprints for missiles.
Of course, they need technology, components, illicit activities to fuel the nuclear and missile programs.
Insiders who worked for the regime tell Panorama how it uses secret front companies to fund its weapons program.
Their top priority is, building this nuclear arsenal.
So what can President Trump do as Kim Jong-un threatens the world?
North Korea is a situation that should have been handled 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and 5 years ago. But I'll fix the mess.
This is a live fire exercise. Mr. Kim is ready for war. His ultimate target may be America, but it's South Korea which will find itself on the front line first. Millions of people in the capital, Seoul, just 35 miles away. This South Korean village is only a couple of miles from the border. Now, villagers worry they could come under attack from their neighbor. "80-year-old Lee Ho-young is in charge of the village's emergency bunker.
These doors are so heavy, huh?
이렇게 문을 열고 들어와서 하면 됩니다, 이제. 키우고.
Oh, it's huge. So what, the whole village comes in here, that's the idea.
여기 들어와서 이제 전부 이제.
First, the air burns in close support, scorching the place with napalm.
Korea's been split for the last 70 years. During the Korean War of the 1950s, the US bombed the communist North relentlessly after they attacked the South. General Chun was until recently a top-ranking officer in the South Korean army.
The North Koreans had a very hard experience during the Korean War. The Americans bombed North Korea so much that there were no more targets to bomb. They remembered the bombings.
Today, the US still maintains 24,000 troops in South Korea. North Korea boasts of the fourth largest military in the world, over 1 million troops.
The threat to America and its allies comes not from a superpower like China or Russia, but from the Kim family, 3 generations, who've run North Korea for nearly 7 decades. They're secretive, paranoid, but utterly determined to have nuclear weapons.
Kim Jong-un's grandfather, who started the Kim dynasty, kicked off the race for nuclear weapons in the 1960s. His father carried out the first nuclear test. He's only been in power 6 years, but Kim Jong-un's carried out many more missile and nuclear tests than they did. Former insiders know about Kim Jong-un's obsession with nuclear weapons. A top North Korean diplomat in London defected last year. Today he lives in South Korea under heavy protection. His life is in danger.
Kim Jong-un is very desperate he still thinks that he lacks the legitimacy of his role as a new leader in North Korea. He wants to deliver to North Korean society that he has ability to lead this country for another several decades.
In his first televised speech, Mr. Kim declared nuclear weapons would make North Korea a formidable world power.
군사기술적 우세는 더는 제국주의자들의 독점물이 아니며 적들이 원자탄으로 우리를 위협 공갈하던 시대는 영원히 지나갔습니다.
General Wesley Clark had decades of experience of international conflict as a senior US military commander.
He's decided that he's going to be the member of the Kim family who achieves the 3 long-term Kim objectives. First, the regime must survive. Secondly, to get the United States out of South Korea. And third, to unify the peninsula and all of Korea under the Kim family leadership.
To be a serious nuclear threat to America, Kim Jong-un needed 2 things: a long-range missile and a nuclear warhead small enough to fit onto it. In July, he oversaw the successful launch of this missile, the Hwasong-14. It has the potential to travel 10,000 kilometers and puts much of America in range.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
Since last year, Kim Jong-un's been boasting that he has developed a nuclear weapon small enough to fit on the missile. And last month, North Korea took the world by surprise when it tested what it claimed was a hydrogen bomb.
대륙간 탄도 로켓 장착용 수소탄 시험에서 완전 성공.
The blast, announced by the regime's propaganda mouthpiece, is believed to be 10 times that at Hiroshima.
국가 핵무력 완성의 완결 단계 목표를 달성하는 데서 매우 의의 있는 계기로 된다.
North Korea is now thought to have more than 30 nuclear warheads. Christopher Hill made repeated attempts to get the North Koreans to abandon their nuclear program.
I don't see how the U.S. can ignore this. The United States has not had a new country pointing a nuclear weapon at the United States since really the 1950s and 60s. This is a major situation.
Olli Heinonen, a UN weapons inspector, has been inside North Korea's nuclear facilities.
I think that we have come now to a very serious juncture. They have demonstrated with the recent nuclear test that they have probably got a very powerful advanced nuclear device, but I think they still need to work. They need to make it perhaps smaller.
So, do you think that North Korea has the ability to hit the west coast of America with nuclear weapons?
Most likely, but not with a big number.
So how did North Korea develop these weapons? Part of the answer may lie in the former Soviet Union. The Russians were masters at sending rockets into space. And when the Soviet Union broke apart, that expertise was suddenly for sale. Bruce Klingner was a career intelligence analyst in the 1990s.
We have reports back when the Soviet Union collapsed that a lot of the Soviet and then Russian nuclear scientists, rocket scientists were out of jobs. They were looking for money. So some traveled to North Korea. There were reports of 10 former Soviet nuclear rocket scientists in North Korea.
And there was highly prized missile technology in former Soviet countries, including in this factory in Ukraine. July 2011. 2 North Korean spies have come to Ukraine to try and photograph plans in the factory's design office. But what they don't know is Ukrainian security services have set up a covert sting operation. We've protected the identity of one officer who agreed to speak to us.
We knew what was going on. They were interested in scientific documents about solid fuel, which is used in rockets.
The North Koreans were trying to get their hands on blueprints for a missile, all part of the regime's determination to get weapons of mass destruction. But the Ukrainians foiled the plot.
False documents were created for them to see, nothing top secret, and they agreed to buy them for a very small amount of money. They'd probably been trying to get this information for some time.
The 2 spies are now in prison. Since then, the Ukrainians have intercepted what they believe to be 2 more North Korean plots to get hold of their missile secrets.
Russia and Ukraine government even acknowledged the fact that North Koreans tried in the past, and they said that Ukraine government frustrated all those activities, but who knows?
The Ukrainians manufactured an engine, the RD-250, which powered long-range missiles. The only other place it was made was Russia. A similar engine based on the RD-250 was spotted on one of Kim Jong-un's Hwasong missiles. The Russian manufacturers deny working with the North Koreans. The Ukrainians say the engine didn't come from them.
It's definitely a different engine according to our experts, but has some details which were based on the RD-250. I can tell you it's impossible to steal or take photographs or make copies of the engine or take any of the special tools used for it. All of this is impossible.
But what's certain is that somehow North Korea has developed advanced technical know-how.
I don't think that we know very much what went out from Ukraine, if anything. But for me, at the very end, the most important question is still, is there a scientist or a couple of scientists from this former Soviet missile program who have been working in North Korea? And I think that to that end, the jury is still out.
The Kim regime hasn't just relied on technical help from abroad. Its nuclear achievements are largely homegrown. They've been driven by ingenuity and knowledge, built up over decades.
Kim Jong-un treats his nuclear scientists as heroes. They're a privileged elite in a country where many people live in poverty. They've made the most of the limited technology they've managed to acquire to build their own capability.
It is a self-reliant society. Of course, they need technology, components, but it's an indigenous program.
The result is a network of extensive nuclear facilities. In this secretive state, one of the best ways to see them is from above.
We use this to peer into North Korea from the sky because really it's incredibly difficult to get information from the ground there.
Curtis Melvin spent years using satellite pictures to study North Korea, including its secret nuclear sites.
So where are these test explosions actually taking place?
The nuclear test site is on the East Coast. They've dug several tunnels into these mountains and they've conducted all of their tests here. The nuclear research facility is in Yongbyon County in North Pyongyang Province. It has a large security perimeter around it, which I've drawn here in yellow. And this is an area where the scientists live.
But what they have done a lot is what we call a reverse engineering. So you buy top-notch equipment under false certificates, just one or two, perhaps using your diplomatic missions abroad or some shady companies. Get those pieces of equipment to your country and then produce them yourself.
The US and the United Nations have imposed sanctions. They were supposed to stop North Korea getting nuclear weapons by shutting off the flow of technology and the money to pay for them. But thanks to its main ally, China, the regime's managed to evade those sanctions. China has its own reasons to use North Korea in an effort to reduce America's influence in the region.
So there's been a long-term strategy on the part of China to use North Korea as the barking dog to create tension, which would then, you'd be able to say to the South Koreans, there's too much tension. Why don't you ask the Americans to leave your country?
As well as trading openly with China, North Korea also hides behind Chinese front companies. This defector saw firsthand how the deception makes money for the Kim regime.
North Korean banks send representatives to Chinese regions, and they open accounts at these banks, and then they do transactions through these false accounts.
The defector says the regime runs a secret system to pay for the weapons. It's controlled by Kim Jong-un himself.
We call it second economy, hidden, secret economy.
So Kim is personally making sure that the money goes into the missile and the nuclear program?
Yes, he controls all foreign cash in North Korea. And when needed more to this missile program and nuclear program, he gives more. Their top priority is, building this nuclear arsenal.
But the West's efforts to stop Mr. Kim have failed. Anthony Ruggiero tried to enforce US sanctions on North Korea.
Over the last 10 years, North Korea has not been the foreign policy priority. Plainly, sanctions have not worked. And we need to do a lot more. We need to be targeting North Korea's international network so that they cannot buy things overseas for their missile program or their nuclear weapons program.
North Korea is a situation that should have been handled 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and 5 years ago. You had various administrations, many administrations, which left me a mess. But I'll fix the mess.
The mess, as the president puts it, is starting to alarm people in America. Seattle on the West Coast is 5,000 miles from North Korea. And now it's in reach of Kim Jong-un's long-range missiles.
We're the home of Amazon, Boeing, Microsoft.
A state senator, Mark Milosha, believes his city could be devastated in a potential nuclear attack.
I know Seattle would be, for any bad guy, would be the top of the target list if they wanted to make a statement and hit the United States.
Senator Milosha flew nuclear-armed bombers for the US Air Force when America faced down the Soviets in the 1980s.
What will happen if North Korea does launch a missile? Are we prepared? Are we ready? Can we evacuate? Can we save lives? Those are the issues I think we haven't thought about since the Cold War back in the 90s.
President Trump has threatened in a tweet that Kim Jong-un's regime may not be around much longer. North Korea called that a declaration of war.
What's got people even more worried this time is the unpredictable personalities on both sides, President Trump and Kim Jong-un. So, what's behind their rhetoric And do either of them have a strategy?
남수선을 타고 앉아 아시아 태평양 지배 전략을 실현하려는 미국을 비롯한 외세의 침략과 간섭 책동을 끝장내며
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
After Donald Trump's Rocket Man taunt, Mr. Kim released a personal statement, relayed by his favorite newsreader.
미국의 늑살인 미치광이를 반드시 불로 다스릴 것이다.
The United States has great strength and patience, but if it is forced to defend itself or its allies, we will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
President Trump has been accused of acting irrationally.
I think he's rational. I think he's simply very inexperienced. I always suggest that people read up on a problem as much as they can, and I'm not sure President Trump has accepted that type of advice. I think the consequence of it is that if you don't understand the history that came before, you're often doomed to repeat problems.
But could the US president's approach actually be effective?
I think one of the advantage we have at this moment is the so-called unpredictability of President Trump. That kind of rhetoric is necessary in order to scare Kim Jong-un.
Kim Jong-un has been accused of being a deranged dictator, out of touch with reality.
He has absolute power. He thinks that he is invincible. So this man is not crazy, but he could be delusional. That's really frightening.
He's not crazy as many have depicted him at. He's not going to wake up some morning and just start a war because he's a lunatic or unhinged.
I don't think that he may do any kind of suicidal, the attack on America.
You think it's brinkmanship? It's
That's
not
right.
a death wish, if you like.
Yes. North Korea now actually is testing the red line of Americans' mind, and North Korea understands well where these red lines are.
President Trump has backed up his fiery rhetoric with an increased show of military might. But what are his options now? The first is a so-called decapitation strike, taking out Kim Jong-un and his circle. South Korean forces have even been practicing. David Maxwell, a US Special Forces colonel who's done 5 tours of South Korea, doubts it would work.
We have to realize that their entire system is designed to protect Kim Jong-un. There are 3 rings of defense around him. And it's likely that he will be in a deeply buried underground facility that will have to be penetrated while there are military forces counterattacking.
The president's second option is to strike Kim Jong-un's missile and nuclear facilities, but many of them are hidden.
Just recently they did a launch from this factory here, but it's largely an underground manufacturing facility.
Under this hillside here,
Yes.
covered in trees?
Yes.
So you mean there's a whole factory
There's
under
a whole
there?
factory under there. And of course we can't observe that.
And this, of course, just shows you how difficult it would be for a military strike to take out all the missile sites.
I would say most of North Korea's important military infrastructure is underground.
These red dots show Mr. Kim's artillery massed along his border. If the US did opt for a first strike, North Korea would be bound to retaliate. One strategy, to use massive conventional firepower against South Korea.
It is hard to put a number on the blood and treasure that will be expended, but we will have a greater loss of civilian lives than we have seen in any war since World War II in Korea.
There's no easy, quick fix answer. There's no military solution. You can snap your fingers and say, okay, diplomats, get out of the way. We military guys know how to solve this. It's not going to happen. And there's no easy way you can send your best diplomats in and have some people say, oh, what a genius he is. He's worked everything out.
Across the water in North Korea, there's no sign Mr. Kim is ready for talks on dismantling or freezing his nuclear arsenal. And though it's been confirmed the US does have lines of communication with North Korea, Donald Trump said trying to negotiate is a waste of time.
Do you think that Kim Jong-un will give up his nuclear weapons?
Never. Why?
Why wouldn't he give them up?
Oh, because their goal of making these weapons is to drive out US troops from South Korea. So before that, they will never give up.
In the South Korean village, the farmers have been stopped from going to their fields along the border. They lived through the Korean War. Now war hangs over them again. How is the situation here at the moment?
When I listen to the radio, I feel really horrified. If war breaks out, the Third World War will take place, and it's going to be a nuclear war. Everyone will die if it happens.
Kim Jong-un is playing his nuclear trump card to stay in power. But will he know when it's time to stop?
If you put the Kim regime in a position where he sees it's use it or lose it on his nuclear weapons, you actually don't know what decision he's going to make.
I think he is intelligent enough to know how much he can get away with. But, you know, there's a saying in Korea, never corner a rat. You leave a little space for that rat to flee.
Fox News alert now. North Korea reportedly is going after President Trump as a, quote, hooligan and lunatic, and warning the United States is running headlong into ruin. Let's go outnumbered overtime now. I'm Harris Faulkner. This follows a report that the U.S. is ready to put its nuclear bombers back on 24-hour alert for the first time since the Cold War. But an Air Force spokesperson is pushing back on that, saying the current plan does not have any such movement in it, but they must be ready if directed. And President Trump is echoing that. He told Fox News yesterday that the U.S. is ready to respond to North Korea if needed. Watch.
We're prepared for anything. We are so prepared like you wouldn't believe. You would be shocked to see how totally prepared we are. Wow. If we need to be. Would it be nice not to do that? The answer is yes. Will that happen? Who knows?
Let's bring in Ambassador John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations and a Fox News contributor and senior fellow for the American Enterprise Institute. Ambassador, always good to see you. So important to get your points of view now on this Monday. I have read an editorial that you have written, and something stood out. You said we can't let Kim Jong-un and his bizarre regime have America by the throat. Why would you put it that way?
Well, I think that's the position we would be in if we allowed North Korea to acquire and retain the capability to hit any target in the United States with thermonuclear weapons, which they are very close to doing, as CIA Director Mike Pompeo said just a few days ago. And that's why I think the president's upcoming trip to Asia is going to be important. This meeting today, the Prime Minister of Singapore, important in its own right to be sure, but also helping to set the stage for that. I think North Korea will be probably the single most important issue for the president, certainly in his meetings in Japan, South Korea, and China, but also with the countries of Southeast Asia as well.
You know, Ambassador, you and I often talk about points of history being so important to go back to. And in your article, and today, I would love for you to tell our viewers about something that happened. Franklin Roosevelt, September 11th, 1941.
Well, you know, this was a period just obviously less than 2 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, and President Roosevelt faced some very difficult decisions. And one of the decisions that he announced on that fireside chat on September the 11th was giving the U.S. Navy authorization to fire first at German submarines and warships, saying you don't wait when you see a rattlesnake poised to bite before you kill it, basically. And I think this is a lesson in preemption. It's a hard lesson. It's not one we want to face. But I think it's one the president needs to make clear to North Korea and to China that he's prepared to undertake, like Roosevelt did, to protect the interest of the United States. Hopefully there's still a peaceful way to get these nuclear weapons away from North Korea, but time is running out. That's the hard reality.
So what I understand you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about making a preemptive strike on North Korea, right? And we know from recent polling that most Americans don't support that. Is it time, are we getting close to the point where the president should make his own fireside chat?
Well, I don't favor it except as a last resort, but the president was very clear in his speech to the UN back in September when he said denuclearization is the only way forward for North Korea. And that is a rejection of the point of view held by Susan Rice, Barack Obama's national security advisor, and many others who share their views that we could live with a nuclear North Korea. So the conversations in particular that President Trump will have with China when he visits there in just a couple of weeks, I think it's very important to lay that out to the Chinese and make it clear that we are serious and that we're very nearly out of time to make a decision here.
I'm about to quote you to you. Sit tight. You say, or rather you write, in the fireside chat, Roosevelt observed that others, quote, had refused to look the Nazi danger squarely in the eye until it actually had them by the throat. Do you think that there are some in this country who might have some power or some influence who are not looking the danger of North Korea squarely in the eye?
I think the Obama administration spent 8 years not looking the danger squarely in the eye, and I don't think they looked the Iranian threat in the eye either. During this entire period of time, they said, oh, of course we don't want these two countries to get nuclear weapons. It turns out they weren't serious about it. And when they admit, as Susan Rice did, that 25 years of prior efforts over 3 administrations had failed to stop North Korea, she said, well, now I guess we just have to accept it. I do not accept this failure. And I do not accept that the United States should be held hostage by this strange regime in North Korea or by the mullahs in Tehran while we're on the subject.
You know, Ambassador, last hour on Outnumbered, we had some breaking news with the Prime Minister of Singapore here visiting the White House. President Trump, the two of them walked out shortly ago, and they announced a deal where Singapore is going to buy Boeing planes, and they're having conversations about a whole host of things. How does North Korea come up in that conversation between those two leaders?
Well, you know, the United States and Singapore have had an outstanding relationship over decades, and Singapore is a very important ally in trying to prevent China, for example, from essentially taking over the South China Sea and making it into a Chinese province, a major player inside the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and a country that recognizes that nuclear proliferation, whether it's to North Korea or others in the Asia region, is a direct threat to them. Singapore is a tiny country, one nuclear weapon, and there wouldn't be a Singapore anymore. So they've cooperated with us in a variety of ways, including the Proliferation Security Initiative, to stop countries like North Korea and Iran from benefiting from the port of Singapore to acquire dangerous technology like in the nuclear field.
Real quickly before I let you go, also breaking news last hour, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson touching down in Iraq, set to meet with leaders there, including Abadi, the Prime Minister, but potentially also the President of that country. A quick thought from you.
Well, you know, the government of Iraq, sadly, is under the domination of the Ayatollahs in Tehran. It was one of the consequences of pulling American forces out in 2011. I'm not sure there's much that could be done, but I hope one message that Secretary Tillerson delivers is leave the Kurds alone. Don't take any further military steps against them. I think we should be helping the Kurds in material ways, and I hope Secretary Tillerson delivers a very strong message that Iraq and Iran are not going to solve the Kurdish problem by force.
Everybody should read your article. A lot of history in that, which is always good for everybody to see. Ambassador John Bolton, thank you very much.
John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Senior Fellow, American Enterprise Institute, and a Fox News contributor. And, sir, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Just react to some of the comments from the president. Come to the table, make a deal, says we're making good progress. What does that sound like to you?
Well, not much, frankly. I mean, he's in South Korea. He's got a delicate political task. The president takes a very soft line on how to handle North Korea. But South Korea itself is very divided. The leader of the opposition a few weeks ago called for the United States to redeploy tactical nuclear weapons there, which is a pretty tough stance. You know, I think it is virtually certain North Korea is not going to be talked out of its long effort to get deliverable nuclear weapons. They've fiddled with us for 25 years. CIA Director Mike Pence said a few weeks ago they're very close to the finish line. Pompeo, beg your pardon. So I don't think now that there's any serious possibility.
Could you get North Korea to freeze its program?
They would say that they would freeze their program. They've done that before, but to really verify it, you need the kind of intrusive presence in North Korea they will never agree to. So I just think we're past that point. I think the real conversation, if there is to be a diplomatic answer, is not with North Korea, it's with China on the president's next stop.
By the way, I just want to be clear. We're not talking about President Trump sitting at that table. We're talking about representatives in the United States to do that. But that's what the North Koreans have always wanted. They've wanted that for 20 years. And they get the bribe and they get the money and they go back to doing their nefarious deeds behind closed borders yet again.
Sure.
This pattern does not change.
That's exactly right. They could agree to talks now. Why? Because they're so close they want to freeze the United States. I can hear the State Department the day after North Korea agrees to the talks. Let's not do anything that jeopardizes these diplomatic negotiations while the North Koreans get across the finish line. This is an old Chinese communist strategy known as da-da, tan-tan, fight, fight, talk, talk. Fight, fight for the North Koreans means getting their nuclear program in shape, and they'll talk once they're ready.
Wow. 12 missile tests so far this year. Not one, however, in the past 2 months. What does that mean to you?
Well, it could mean a lot of things. Occasionally, it even means something scientific and technological, that they're making modifications for whatever reason. A lot of speculation they might do something during the president's Asia trip. That still remains to be seen. But I think it's very hard to read any significance, any strategic significance into the moratorium. We just don't know enough about what happens in North Korea to have an educated guess.
Thank you, sir. John Bolton, we'll call on you again real soon, okay? In Washington today, 20 past. Sandra? This is alert now on North Korea, now saying nuclear war could break out at any moment. It's claiming the U.S. is moving the needle toward a nuclear crisis. Quote, unless the hostile policy and the nuclear threat of the U.S. is thoroughly eradicated, we will never put our nuclear weapons and ballistic rockets on the negotiation table under any circumstance. Now, these latest threats, as Vice President Mike Pence says, the U.S. is looking for a peaceful resolution.
To be clear, the United States of America will continue to bring the full range of American power to bear on the regime in Pyongyang, as we hope to achieve through diplomatic and economic means a peaceable solution and the achievement of the long-sought goal of a nuclear-free Korean peninsula.
John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Senior Fellow American Enterprise Institute, and a Fox News contributor. And, sir, good morning to you. So the rhetoric's hot. Does it match the facts?
This is propaganda from the North Koreans. They're trying to intimidate those Americans who are capable of being intimidated, and unfortunately there are a large number of them. The threat in the region is North Korea's nuclear weapons program. That's what we've been grappling with unsuccessfully for 25 years. And the idea that somehow we're responsible for it really is ludicrous, except to those who buy that kind of North Korean propaganda.
Now, you used to work at the UN. You know this stuff very well. Apparently, the prepared remarks had that comment, nuclear war may break out at any moment, but it was not read out loud. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, they're very good at getting what they want out without actually having it on the record that way. So this is the very fact we're talking about. It shows that they're successful. I think what it means for American policy, though, is we've just got to keep our eye on the ball. They are definitely getting close to the capacity to hit targets all over the continental United States. They said the other day, though, they wouldn't negotiate until they already had that capability. So time is running out. It has been running out, and it's landed in the Trump administration's lap. But nobody should be under any illusions that after 25 years and getting this close to the finish line, North Korea is going to be talked out of its nuclear weapons program. That is not going to happen.
Not going to happen.
Right. I think the only diplomatic possibility here is with China to put either enough pressure on the regime in North Korea that it collapses, or to acknowledge we need to reunite the two Koreas. Otherwise, the options look a lot grimmer, and I think we have to acknowledge that. Otherwise, look, there's an easy answer here. We can just stop all this and let North Korea get nuclear weapons and live with it. That's what Susan Rice, the national security in the Obama administration, wants to do.
Well, Secretary Kelly last week said it's developing a pretty good nuclear re-entry vehicle, so the program continues to advance, as you point out there. They think we want to take their leader out. Our leader goes there in November. President Trump will visit South Korea. He may go to the DMZ. How significant should we view that trip, sir?
Well, this trip to Asia is very significant in a number of respects. He'll be in Japan, South Korea, then China, then Southeast Asia. I definitely think it's important for the president to go to South Korea. I know he's been there before. I don't know if he's been to the demilitarized zone. It's something that I wish every American could see and confront the North Koreans. But I think this is very important to show them that we are determined, as the president said in his speech to the United Nations a few weeks ago, that as far as North Korea goes, denuclearization is the only way forward, meaning they are not left with nuclear weapons, period.
Thank you, sir. We will talk again about this, too.